Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Victor Dzau, who, as all of you know, is the president of the National Academy of Medicine. In addition to his role at the NAM, Dr. Dzau serves as vice chair of the U.S. National Research Council. He's also Chancellor Emeritus and James B. Duke Professor of Medicine at Duke University, and is the past president and CEO of the Duke University Health System. He's really an internationally acclaimed leader and scientist, has made significant impact through his research in cardiovascular medicine and genetics. And at the National Academies, Dr. Dzau has designed and led important initiatives such as the Commission on Global Health Risk Framework for the Future, the Human Gene Editing Initiative, which I think you're going to hear about, and Vital Directions for Health and Health Care. The launch of the NAM Grand Challenges in Healthy Longevity represents his vision to inspire across disciplines and sectors to coalesce around a shared priority and audacious goal to advance health. Now, Victor and I met actually a long time ago when Victor was still at the Brigham and Women's. And so I've had the pleasure of interacting with Victor over the years since that time in the early days. So after Dr. Dzau has concluded his presentation, there should be some time for questions. And if you'd like to ask questions, please approach those microphones that are in the audience. So I'd like to really welcome Victor Dzau. Thank you for coming to Dallas, Victor. That's the slide.
Good. Thank you, Joe. Two of the people I most respect, Gordon England and Joe Takahashi, I mean, I couldn't ask for better. It's really, to me, a great privilege to be speaking to this very august group. I mean, having an academy that brings together all the three disciplines is just amazing. We're trying to do that now at the National Academy as well, and I'll mention that briefly in my remarks. But it's a great pleasure. So when I said, what should I talk about? I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a neurobiologist. In fact, this was my assignment. I was given, I believe it was maybe Terrence or Cindy sent this to me and say, talk about the academy. So it's my report card of what we're doing at the National Academy of Medicine, emphasis on diversity and young people, talk a little bit about the opioid initiative, and you're going to be hearing later on the opioid initiative in different dimensions. Particularly, you'll have Admiral Brett Giroir, who's a collaborator, of course, national leader in this issue. The importance of interaction between basic translational science and clinical practice, particularly the importance of basic science and neuroscience and other new things. So that's a tall order. So what I took this assignment seriously. So what I thought I would do is tell you first about the National Academy, of course, where we are, in this case, National Academy of Medicine. But I also want to emphasize that as of 3.5 years ago, when we did the reorganization, we are trying to follow you, bring together much closer the three academies and working in many areas closely together. So this slide shows you what's happened since 3.5 years ago. As many of you know, and I should acknowledge Ken Shine's presence, he was the previous distinguished president of the Institute of Medicine, that under his leadership and others, I believe we established the medicine, particularly the Institute of Medicine, as a leading academy. But it's 3.5 years ago when we actually formally became the National Academy of Medicine through a series of votes and others. So what you see here today is the three national academies, engineering, science, and medicine, co-governing the National Academies complex, having an intermediate organization called the National Research Council, or the NRC. NRC is the operating arm of the National Academies, And you can see that underneath there are divisions. Divisions of physical and life sciences, engineering sciences, and so on and so forth, all the way to health medicine, et cetera. So that's the kind of programmatic unit of the National Academies. So first, in the reorganization, we not only changed our name, but we actually have to have a set of bylaws. And that bylaws very much is in keeping with not only our previous bylaws, but that with the NAS and NAM. We, of course, have to delineate responsibilities, particularly between what's happened to the old Institute of Medicine, IOM, and NAM. Branding, now we call it National Academy of Medicine, but you should know that from now on, all the reports that come out from the National Academies, or NRC, is now branded solely as the product of National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, Medicine. So the reports that you read now no longer reflect a division or NRC or IOM, but reflect everybody together. So that's really, to me, a very powerful brand. And the message, of course, is very strong about the collaboration. A fair amount of work in developing what the NAM is now as an opportunity as a, quote, new academy, although really it's not that new because it's been functioning like an academy. And what I want to do is to point out to you first, because we're dealing with academies for members in all the three academies, how much we're now coming together to work closely together. I was telling Ken Shine, there's probably not a single day where Dan Mote or Marsha McNutt and I are not communicating, if not sitting down to make decisions together. So almost no major decisions in the National Academies now are not, almost no major are not made, with all of us together. And importantly, I told you about branding. We decided that although we maintain our three academies as independent and interdependent, the brand for the academies remain the same, but the product of the NRC is now cross-academy branding. Very important issue is looking at how we conduct our work. As you know, most of our reports, convening, etc., are done through the NRC. Although the national academies, the three academies themselves have programs, but the majority of the reports are done through the NRC. So there's been a concern that the NRC is not as efficient. In other words, people say your reports take a long time, cost a lot of money, and that we need to how to modernize our organization. So we've undertaken a whole effort in transforming, we call it transformation NRC, having an outside committee to look at it, making recommendations, and now we have Boston Consulting Group coming in to help us project manage and to make some of the changes, including being more innovative, more creative in the way we approach things. At the academies, because NAS has been around for 150 years, we have many things we've done for a long time the same way. It's a really good opportunity now for us to say, should we actually look at how to do the convening? Should we look at fast-tracking more reports? How do you actually use today's communication systems to actually have less face-to-face meeting? And importantly, how do we do communications and branding? So we have many cross-academy activities. I'm only giving you a few examples, such as the Committee on Science, Engineering, Medicine, and Public Policy, Committee on Women in Science, Engineering, Medicine, and many others. So clearly, across the academies, we're working together on really important issues. We have many now joint programs and collaborators, and I'm only listing some as examples. So between NAS and NAM is the Human Genome Editing Initiative, which I'll briefly talk about in my remarks. We're certainly looking at a big across-the-academy initiative called Environmental Health Matters, in which case all three academies and selected members, et cetera, are working on the whole big initiative and looking at how to look at environment and health. And of course, in the current environment, pardon the pun, situation, this was a very important initiative going forward. And I'll mention briefly our Convergence. As you know, the NRC wrote a really important report, a number of reports about Convergence Sciences, and MIT as well. Particularly in MIT's report, it says the future of health, the bring together of life science, physical science, computation, imaging, and to solve the problem together of whatever is ahead of us. And importantly, we are working together on the code of conducts. And I know that NAS has approved its code of conduct. NAM has done so as well in council and being posted now, actually posted for your comment already. And NAE will be voting, I believe, in February its code of conduct. Needless to say, we're harmonizing this because we recognize we should be very much thinking along the same way, and particularly since they're members who are actually in several academies. And finally, we have been working towards the idea of a campaign, development campaign across the 3 academies. So I'm going to focus my remarks today first on where we are at NAM, according to my assignment, telling you about what efforts we're making. But suffice to say that now there's such close collaboration across the academies. Almost everything I say has implications or real activities with the other academies as well. So when we became, quote, the new National Academy of Medicine, first thing we did is ask to relook at our vision and mission. And our previous mission statement says something like this: the IOM is an independent nonprofit organization that is a trusted advisor in health and medicine to a nation. We thought we need to be more aspirational and taking a step back. Certainly in what we do, we think about a healthier future for everyone. And importantly, we do it through science and knowledge and policy, and of course, addressing health equity. And that is, in fact, how we have restructured our vision and mission. We also wanted to ask ourselves, if we're an academy, and of course, let me take a step back by saying we're members academy like the other 2 academies. And so our members are elected. We have about 2,000 members in total, almost similar size as an NAE and NAS. And I mentioned earlier today in my table, a quarter of our members of NAM are non-physicians, non-nurses, non-health professions. That was recognized some time ago that for us to do our work, we need engineers, economists, social scientists, and others to enable, think about what do we do to change the future or trajectory of health and medicine. And so we have basic scientists, practitioners, epidemiologists, social scientists, and engineers, many others. And in so doing, much of our work is thinking about how to actually make a difference. So what I showed you here is the starting point of the academy by saying, now that we need to articulate, we do a lot of great stuff. I mean, first I want to recognize Ken Shine's leadership and to Airs Human. This is probably the most important report, a well-celebrated report ever about patient safety. So the way we look at it is that we work closely with our peers and the NRC divisions to drive directions. But we as leading academy need to think about how to shape policy, etc. So we set our priorities, and there are 3. One is to recognize there are always major issues that someone needs to speak up and take on and be proactive. So that is what we call respond to critical and pressing issues. And of course, the Academy is uniquely positioned because of our voice and our influence to say we care about opioid. We're going to do something about this. This is what we're unique in doing, and maybe perhaps better than other organizations, because that's what we do. The second, of course, is a continuation of what we do best, which is advising the nation and globally in the future of health and healthcare, generating important reports and convening different groups, And the third one is to say, as a leading academy, what do we do to inspire people? We learn a little bit from the Engineering Academy, Grand Challenges. I think the National Academy of Engineering have this great idea of Grand Challenge. It is 14 major future-looking areas from that task force, but it's mainly focused on education. We thought we'd take one area that we can bring people together to work on, and I'll talk almost very briefly on that. So on the first one, I list a few examples. These are initiatives that we've taken as an academy, starting and kicking it off, and then working alongside with the divisions of NRC to implement many of these. So you can clearly see that the first one is response to the Ebola outbreak. What really happened about 3-4 years ago was this West Africa outbreak of Ebola. Tremendous concern about the lack of coordinated and sufficient adequate response, particularly from WHO, but also in regions, and also how to coordinate with civil society, et cetera. So my protege, Jim Kim, now the president of the World Bank, who is in fact, as you know, a physician, asked me if we would do an independent assessment, because we know WHO was doing it, UN was doing it, and so we did. And this was a very impactful report that led to a number of major changes, particularly along the idea of research and development, development of an organization called CEPI in vaccine development, et cetera. And I want to skip quickly to the bottom of this slide to show you the gene editing. It was about 2.5, 3 years ago when 3 of my council members, Keith Yamamoto, Bob Horwitz, and Mark Fishman, talked to me about the emerging area which is now needs some kind of guideline, if you will, and professional scientific conduct to oversee this. And if you remember, we had the Silomar conference in 1975 that was held by NAS at the time, Paul Berg, and also David Baltimore, to look at recombinant DNA. So the idea is to create something similar. And I went to talk to late Ralph Ciceron, who actually was hearing also from his members. So together, we kicked off this initiative, which I'll come back and talk about briefly. And the other two, as an example, are the responding to really pressing needs. Burnout among clinicians, doctors, nurses, et cetera, is becoming a significant problem. It's a crisis, certainly a crisis of the health professions. And so it was, in fact, ACGME, AAMC, and many others who came together to say, let's work with NAM to create a collaborative to really address collectively this issue of burnout, bringing payers and electronic health record and many others. And finally, the one on the opioid. So the opioid initiative, which we kicked off about a little bit over 6 months ago, after a fair amount of work, there really, as you many know, this crisis. Gordon England talked about the fact that more people died from opioid overdose last year than in all of Vietnam, and I think this is truly an amazing epidemic. So it's not for lack of interest, not lack of funding. There's a lot of funding now. The question really is, what can we do that is value added, if you will? So this involved a fair amount of planning and working alongside with, as you hear later on, with Admiral Brett Giroir, the Assistant Secretary of Health. We found that there were still many gaps and many lack of coordination, lots of silo activity within federal government, within state government, within different organizations, and there are still lots of gaps. For example, education and others. So we decided to create a public-private partnership, bringing together the key stakeholders, and I'll show you a quick slide about them, to think about how collectively we can move across the silos, which is the sweet spot of the national academies, to address this issue. So to make a long story short, you can see we had, I guess I'm off by one slide. So that was, in fact, the purpose of the collaborative that we established. Public-Private Partnership. And we got together some maybe 80 or so organizations that really represent the spectrum of stakeholders who have a role in the issue of the opioid, whether it's treatment or whether it's prescription or whether otherwise. And this group come together and spend a few days really in many ways designing what we should be doing forward. And this is where we are. We have created a collaborative that includes 40 organizations and a network of organizations. Those 40, which one for a core group, create a steering committee, which I, co-chairing with the Assistant Secretary of Health, so clearly a public-private partnership, with Ruth Katz from the Aspen Institute and with Jonathan Perlin from XCA. So we purposely look at different aspects of this, and then we have steering committees and decided 4 work streams. First, if you go to medical school and ask, what are you teaching in pain management, in addiction management, et cetera, I would say you get great variability. Everybody say they're doing it, but some do it for a week, some do it for a lot more. If you go to specialties and ask, how do you train them, it's highly dependent what specialty you're in, and many of them do it really by observation. So, and then of course there's nursing, dentistry, et cetera. And then of course you're in practice, how do you learn about the latest? So we decided we're going to do an education continuum. So the idea would be to set a national standard with undergraduate medical education, residency training, continuing medical education, along with accreditation and certification. So that, in fact, has been now kicked off with AAMC, ACGME, CCMS, you name it, in trying to create something that's standard and across different health disciplines. Prescribing guidelines. If you think about the CDC guideline of initial prescription 7 days, it's very high level. But if I went to my dentist recently and he gave me a prescription, I don't need it. If I need it for a day. So it turns out an acute indication for pain, depending on the indication, it's not all 7 days. Some need nothing, some need more. So FDA, Scott Gottlieb asked us to actually do a study to look at evidence-based for different acute indication and chronic indication. So that should come up with really much better guidelines. Prevention, treatment, and recovery. Very big issue. Only about, I think about 10% of treatment facilities even have, formally medical-assisted treatment, and there's lots of barriers between reimbursement, stigma, et cetera. So this is, in fact, a big issue. And then finally, of course, we need research data and metrics. So those are the work stream going forward. And we have currently, there you go, 5 studies report that's ongoing, and they are going to be coming out with very specific recommendations. So I just want to tell you we are working on this. You're going to hear from Emerald Brett Giwa, who's from Texas, how close we work with them. In fact, all the HHS leadership, CDC, FDA, SAMHSA, NIDA, and him are at the table with all the others working alongside. This is really, truly a unique thing for national academies because of who we are. The grand challenge, I want to just show this single slide to say that after a lot of work in assessing, surveying, getting input, we have decided that healthy longevity is it. It's not only because our members tend to be older, but because everybody's getting older, right? And the fact is that we do need to look at going forward. And of course, I applaud the work of many of you today on brain sciences, on Alzheimer's, many others. But I think the issue for us is how to stay healthy, because longevity is no longer, out of reach. I would say that if you look at our life expectancy, even though, as you know, it's flattened, if not dropped a little bit for social reasons, overall, I would say most people in this room are going to live to a riper old age. Issue is no longer that. Living longer is really living healthier. How do we activate the community, both scientists and social activities, to enable healthy longevity. So we thought about a grand challenge that have two components. One is an international commission called the Roadmap, which I think is shown here, which is really a study that brings together people from actually everywhere, learning from Singapore, Japan, elsewhere, where they have lots of different programs of what do we need to do about health promotions, healthcare, what kind of change do we need to make, what do we do about social determinants, social environment, and of course the integration of the two, what do we do about innovation, science and technology, and importantly, policy. So many issues that we need to inform our government about policy to enable a much healthier environment for people as they get older. The other one that we kicked off is awards and prizes. And this is very exciting because we think there's not enough people work in this field. You know, if you ask a young person, what do you work in? They say cancer, at least in the health area, cardiovascular, you name it, GI. When you say you work on aging, you know, so we figure we need to make aging cool, right? Research aging. So the idea is to throw out a lot of awards to catalyze the field. Learning from Tachi Yamada, who has co-chaired this committee, who used to be, as you know, at the Gates Foundation, Grand Challenge Exploration, they would throw out hundreds and hundreds of grants of $100,000 each across the country for many people to apply across the globe to have creative, innovative ideas, just to get people activated, started. So I'm happy to tell you we now have 35 countries sign up. Each country is going to fund X number of these kind of awards under the umbrella of the National Academy of Medicine, coordinated, and we're going to launch it later in the year. So there should be lots of seed grants out there getting people activated. And it's not limited to life sciences, engineering, digital world, and social sciences. And preferably is the combination of those. We're working on other follow-up funding for this, which I won't have time to go into. I want to finish my talk, or most of my talk, about the strategic planning, because as a new academy, and I say new, it gives us a chance to say, where do we want to be, and what we should look like in the next 5 years. And here you see our strategic plan, and I think in this here are the 3 goals. I already talked about goal number 1. Be relevant, be proactive, take on things which are meaningful to our country and to the globe, and be a leader, be willing to kind of drive and shape the changes. Second, of course, is membership. Diversify and activate membership and engage emerging leaders and scholars. And third is building scientific capacity across multiple disciplines. And I'll speak briefly about each one of them. So under goal 1, I already mentioned to you, the 3 clusters are critical issues, future directions in health for the nation, and of course, the grand challenge. In the number 2, these are the major goals: membership diversity, cultivate a lot more stakeholder engagement, cultivating emerging leaders in health and medicine, developing a member code of conduct, and of course, also, as I discussed with our member regional meeting yesterday, we should really look at our election process altogether again. And I'm going to focus mainly on diversity and also emerging leaders. Suffice to say that in the election process, I think it's probably time to relook at whether our election process needs to be modernized. But that's kind of like inside baseball discussion for each academy. Okay, so recognizing this is such a big deal, I would hasten to point out to you that across the 3 academies, we have a lot of conversations. In fact, in our joint council meeting, usually in Irvine, California in February, it's been on our topic for the last 2 meetings, and it will be on it again this year. And I know each academy is working to look at what needs to do to increase diversity, which is a really pressing issue. And it's particularly pressing, I believe, in some of the physical sciences, etc. That being said, for us, we first created a committee that really continues to push for ways not only to identify qualified candidates so it can be nominated, but also importantly, find ways to look at broadening being more sensitized to using criteria to look at diversity and not just simply look at it from a very monolithic viewpoint. And also, as we discussed last night, we need to look at geographic diversity because, let's face it, it's the East Coast and the West Coast. Texas is not doing too badly either. But I think there are many places where there are very few members. We feel that's also an issue of diversity, geographic, ethnic, racial, and expertise in diversity, and of course, age as well. We want to increase the number of people elected under 50, and we now have, in fact, a category to look at specifically, and I'll show you some data. We actually are making good progress in those areas, and we are all working on a better membership database, and as I said, we're planning now to begin to look at the election process altogether. This is our data. If you look back in 2010 to 2018 now, we clearly are doing better. First of all, we're very proud of the fact that 42% are women in the class of 2018 and not too bad in the class of 2017. So we're clearly moving in the right direction. As for minority, we're hovering around 20-some%. And look at this really significant increase in terms of less than 51 years old. So we are certainly making a lot of policy changes, selection, and I know Nick Pappas in the committee, membership committee, he can tell you how hard everybody's working on this. We're going to expand our membership from currently 80 to 100, keeping 10 for international, which means we're going to expand 20 regular members. That gives us more flexibility to look at applying some of the efforts towards more diversity. So those are some of the efforts we're working on. And of course, we strongly believe in cultivating future leaders. We have 8 different fellowships that brings on people who are past, who are mid-career onwards, who are really interested in health policy in particular. And one of them best known is Robert Wood Johnson, health scholars, right? Health policy fellows. But also we have a number of others, including an FDA fellowship and others. And we welcome, in fact, organizations to say we want to actually develop more fellowships around. We have one for emergency medicine, et cetera. The whole idea is cultivating leaders from different specialties to come and work with us, to spend time with us, to learn about, particularly in health sciences and health policy. We have an annual meeting which we engage the DC public health schools and universities to do a case challenge on a specific topic. And it's really quite amazing to see those young people coming together to solve a public health problem. But the new one that we have kicked off 2.5, 3 years ago is this one called Emerging Leaders Health and Medicine. We've created 2 components of this, a scholar program and a forum of meeting. And this one I wanted, to tell you a little bit more about, as I said this morning, is trying to look at mid to early career promising rising stars in health and medicine. And deliberately, we look at across health and medicine. So it's not just basic science or clinical science. It's also about nursing and policy and many other areas. And at the very beginning, we actually handpicked those individuals through the recommendation of council members, et cetera. But as of just this year, we just start opening the process, asking all members to encourage bright people to apply. And we hope to open and double the number of people, if not more. And ultimately, we like to develop a more standardized approach. This is still a pilot phase. A standard approach would be to make announcement to the medical centers and the deans. The criteria are going to be very clear about how many years of training, et cetera. We try to avoid overdoing it because we want to learn what is the most effective way of doing this. But activities include exposure to the things that we do across the academies, coming to our annual meeting and special interest group and networking, and invited to our council meeting, and now they're putting together a symposium, designing symposium, open up to a lot more engagement. Still very much work in progress. In goal number 3, so I talk about goal number 1, what programs do we do to be relevant and leading. Goal number 2, members. Goal number 3 is all about the future of science, health and medicine, bringing together different parts of science. And here what you see is new platforms and innovative approaches to addressing these issues and the convergence of health, biomedical engineering, data, social science, et cetera. So we're very, very much on this interest in bringing together, particularly since we're working so closely with other academies, to actually enhance what we do. In that context, I think this meeting is amazing because I think in neuroscience, it's really a great example if you look at the advances over 50 years of convergence. I mean, the issue of neurogenetics, molecular biology, neuroimaging, computation, and others have really taken from the whole spectrum, in my opinion, from genes all the way to behavior and symptoms, and of course also circuits, and one can also look at disease, cognitive impairment, disease development. So we have at the Academy for a long time been very interested in this issue. This report in 2008, From Molecules to Minds, already said for the 21st century, this is what you really need. Unlocking how the brain works, what's the interplay between biology and experience, and how to restore, protect, enhance functioning brains as we age. And I would say to you, really, I mean this, I'm a cardiovascular person, but if I did start my career again, I think neuroscience is so cool and so exciting. I mean, look at the kind of things that you have made advances, and I am only putting a short list of things in here that I can do as someone who's not a neuroscientist. Genetics, brain mapping, neuroimaging, optogenetics, neurotechnology, many of which are now moving into patient treatment, nanotechnology, and of course, cell and gene therapy. You know, I was just recently at the 30th celebration of Biogen and looking at what they're doing in spinal muscular atrophy and Huntington's in terms of now knowing the genetic defect and doing antisense direct delivery is really quite exciting. There's so much possibility in this field going forward. And of course, at the National Academies, and I mean across the academies, we do have a forum on neuroscience and nervous disorder where we actually bring together not only scientists, but government, industry, academia, disease advocacy organizations to look at what are scientific needs, what are the medical needs, what are the policies, what are the regulation, and what are the interventions, and what ethical, legal, social implications. Lots of things to work on, lots of things. And I'm almost done. Okay, so the final issue I want to point out is the fact that we understand to do this, we have created 3 committees, one across the academies to look at convergence. Second is to understand the importance of basic translational science, certainly in the life sciences, biomedical area. And third, looking at this very important area which gene editing fits. And I'll talk briefly about this because Joe is looking at me to move quickly. Convergence science. I already talked about this, but I want to point out that convergence science is not just the so-called hard sciences. I wrote an editorial in Lancet to say population health is a convergent science when you bring together social, urban design, transportation, you name it. So convergent science and bring together to solve a major problem. This is what we are interested in at Academy. And we have put together an advisory group across the 3 academies of leaders advising the 3 presidents about what is the unique role for us, What is high priority for us in this field, and how can we leverage and coordinate with other activities to advance convergence science? So a lot of funding issues, structural issues, university incentive issues are being discussed. If you look at the scope of medical breakthroughs and the areas of progress, including data science, digital technology, it is truly mind-boggling. One most important thing is to look at translation. So that's why we have a committee that tried to see how we can help to move translation. But finally, in our goal number 3, we talk about social, ethical work implication of these changes. And so in that regard, I believe it's important for our academy to be a leading voice to say, while these technology, AI, gene editing, are going to really change healthcare, we should adopt them. We need to understand the potential societal, ethical, and other implications. Who's doing that? Well, a lot of people are doing it in a silo fashion around one technology, one topic. We want to really create a committee that addresses a spectrum of issues that are implications of science and technology that is moving at lightning speed. What about cost? What about health affordability? What about equity? How about ownership and data's privacy? What about the regulation of, and really governance of AI, biotechnology, and certainly workforce practice and training? So this leads me briefly, Joe, if you indulge me, talk about gene editing. This is obviously a key issue, and as I mentioned, we started with the idea of creating a conference, and we did in 2015 when the Royal Society, Chinese Academy, and the National Academies put together a summit because we recognize we need everybody and not just US at the table. We had social scientists, ethicists, government people there, and out of this came a set of recommendations to move forward to have a second meeting, which we just held in Hong Kong. We actually followed up by a major report that assessed scientific aspects, ethical legal standards, policies, and principles of framework for oversight. So this was all moving along, and then we had our second meeting in Hong Kong. And as you know, in this major meeting, Dr. He from China announced that he actually has delivered or have pregnancy success delivering twins based on gene editing of CCR5 receptor. And this was created a firestorm of condemnation, et cetera. At that meeting, at one point, there were 250 reporters. Literally, we have to kind of prevent them storming the stage. And in live streaming, there's 1.8 million viewers at one point. So the question is, what happens? So from the meeting led by David Baltimore talked about how irresponsible this is and that we need a responsible translational pathway. Marsha and I also wrote that we have deep concerns, and we agree that the academies will lead this effort. This is followed by our editorial together with the Chinese Academy of Science president. So really what we said was we call upon all international academies to work together to come up with a uniform set of principles and guidelines to talk about what to do in this area, so-called translational pathway. What we are now doing ever since then to now is to bring together an international commission of some, hopefully, over 100 academies across the world, but also not only of biomedical sciences, but social sciences, et cetera, to come up with a report that is the next stage of 2017, to be a lot more specific. I can only say for myself, the feeling is that really nothing should move forward in reproductive application until we have met a whole set of criteria, et cetera, and bar. That could, in fact, as Art Baudet and I talked about, what do you do about the pre-diagnostic pre-implantation genetic diagnosis? Is there justification to go forward? I would say stay tuned, but the idea would be it'd be very powerful so that all scientists speak with the same voice, hopefully, but mainly focus on science, and therefore scientific community cannot move forward because they, in fact, will be, I would say, breaking the kind of agreement that we all have. Now, What countries do in terms of regulation is up to them, but I think our report should inform decision makers. The WHO has an expert panel that's put together. We're now coordinating with them because our report can inform what they do in bringing to the 194 countries of the member states. So the last slide really says that there's a need, therefore, for bringing together experts, not only medical, scientific, and ethical, social, but also regulatory experts, and also even people in the venture investment world and industry, together to talk about what are we going to do in creating a framework to proactively address these issues so that we're not responding to it reactively, as we see in Facebook and social media, that we in fact have guidance about how to move forward. So I just want to point out a lot of these things are not done by NAM alone. We are certainly working closely across the academies. And finally, the last slide just simply says that we are celebrating CAN 50th since the forming of IOM in 2020. And we're interested in having a major celebration and kicking off a campaign. Thank you very much.